A mysterious illness has stricken the Pope, Pope Francis II, at the ripe old age of 88 years. Seemingly from nowhere, the Pope found himself ill and bedridden for weeks on end as his strength continued to wane. No modern medicine could pinpoint this strange and sudden sickness that had reared up so quickly and so fiercely, and as such, it could not heal him of it either. The Pope had made peace with the inevitability quite quickly. He even took to a cheeky cigarette or two in his final hours, having never experienced them prior, and only semi-seriously being offered by a peer. Jokes were made about the effects of peer pressure, and even in such a situation as this, no one could help but have a light chuckle at the quip. In his waning moments, Pope Francis held a close audience with his closest friends and his most trusted advisors, imparting years of knowledge and sharing his deepest held secrets. Every word was absorbed and pondered to some length. As the Pope had finished what he had to share, he answered everything he could of whatever was asked of him, and he tried his best with whatever was asked that he did not have a definite answer for. The last rites were performed, seemingly hastily, as the Pope announced he felt the end was drawing nearer at a fastening pace. His companions stood by his side the entire way and indulged in whatever they could for a fading friend. Seemingly falling asleep mid-conversation, the Pope Francis II passed away from his sudden and insidious sickness. His immediate onlookers fell silent and made him comfortable before saying their last pieces and giving the late Pope some space to inform the required parties of the grim news. The mysteries surrounding the Pope bore a heavy burden on those who cared for him in his final moments, blaming themselves incessantly for not being able to do anything in such dire circumstances. The Pope, however, held no ill will against them in any of his remaining enigmatic time. Unable to describe any sensations that had taken hold of his body, feeling entirely alien to any exposure to pain he had experienced in any stage of his life. The feeling, which had described in painstaking detail, he described as his very essence being squeezed or drained in some fashion. It was as if his soul, for lack of any other terms, was losing a rapidly increasing game of tug-of-war with some unknown assailant. Pope Francis's consciousness came to a crescendo, and he quickly found himself wide awake and flung through a cosmic void. Realm after realm of impossibility assailed his every sense as he fell in and out of consciousness again and again. Cities of monolithic proportions and cyclopean abnormalities. Oceans of vast enigmas and inexorable realities washed by in instants. The surrounding became dark, vastly different and tumultuous in their nature. For a moment the Pope began to fear that hell or purgatory must have awaited him, for nothing but could have made him feel so insignificant, and yet one with everything that had passed him by simultaneously. Adamant in his faith, and enraged at the prospect of his life's workings and teaching being naught but in vain, the Pope willed himself forward in an inexorable whirlwind of intent and piety. Reality warped, and the Pope found himself being sucked and slurped through wormhole after wormhole. Fighting in a futile struggle, he was engulfed in luminescence. Reality transmogrified into a brutal storm, and the Pope found himself falling through infinite cloud warfare. Lightning arced and cracked all around him, and nimbic explosions roiled the very air. Cacophonic volumes of sound battered his aged body like a paper bag caught in the torrent of an oceanic swell. Consciousness eaten and regurgitated over and over and over again, as velocity took its terminal hold upon him, until finally his body could not awaken itself once more, and blackness enveloped his every fiber.
Ew. What was that?
Slowly, Pope Francis's senses started to come back to him. His hearing came back first, a long whistle followed by a repeated chirping. A bird? How had a bird survived such a violent epoch? The airs were a swirl of Mother Nature's fury, followed closely by his sense of smell, a fresh scent, the scent of nature. The scent of life was abundant in the still air. Had he been out for so long as the entirety of the storm had passed? But what of his exponential descent just moments ago? His sense of touch returned not long after that. The ground beneath his fingertips was lush and forgiving, and his back nestled softly into it forgivingly. A soft field full of life that was exactly what he had found himself laying amongst.
Who?
His eyes sprang open, a lady's visage burned into his mind.
Pope Chan?
Pope Chan? What was that?
I am a Pope Francis. I have never heard of one such as a Pope Chan before.
The Pope could feel his face blush, although why was entirely not known to him yet.
Please, Pope Chan, please find me. Please. Find me.
Oh, what was that?
The Pope stammered with a start, entirely confused but otherwise completely unharmed. Slowly he sat, then stood, not a mark. Although his white and gold alba was missing, surely a casualty of the storm he had passed through briefly, he stood there completely unharmed. Taking some time to examine his surroundings, he found that it was not quite a lush field of grass and flowers, but rather a sparse forested area, complete with various trees, bushes, and the various noises one would find outdoors. Examining upwards revealed no broken branches or the alike, nothing to indicate he had fallen. This begged the question.
Where am I?
Last thing he remembered before the hallucinations of vast wells and grandiose storms that felt as real as the grass he just lay in, was laying in his bed surrounded by loved ones and lifelong friends. He remembered his life fading quicker than a payless hooker's enthusiasm as he drifted off into the enveloping haze of death's warm embrace. That couldn't be right. Wasn't death meant to feel cold? Yet he distinctly remembered feeling warm before the dark engulfed him and the voids, the plains, and the infinite realms rocketed past him like a rocket. This didn't look anywhere familiar to him. If his loved ones thought him dead, surely he would be in a basilica, or maybe a morgue if that was part of what was going to happen. Maybe they suspected foul play or something. But outside like this, with absolutely no one around, something was very amiss, but also extremely confusing. And who was that lady he saw with the loving eyes who pleaded with him? His confusion was abruptly cut short by a crunch, followed by a rustle from only a few meters away. That was right. He had no idea where he was, so that meant he had no idea what could be lurking around the corner. For all he knew, there could be a deer or anything out there. Best to play it safe and not approach. He need not, as the perpetrator made itself known nearly immediately. And the small creature looking not unlike an owl bobbed into view with a vibrant hoot. It was rather peculiar looking, not looking wholly like an owl, but rather reminiscent of a mammal in some ways. Four-legged with paws, yet beaked like an owl. It was as if the two creatures had copulated and spawned a being existing of two halves, something chimera-like, not from this world. His horrific face was exceedingly cute, and its short furred limbs ended in soft, adorable paws. For being an otherworldly abomination, it sure did melt one's heart to stare at such an adorable little fluff ball. Where had it come from? Were there more? Questions flooded the Pope's mind, and he had no answers, but only speculation. One of his questions was quickly answered as a second of the creatures, this one immensely larger than the first, lumbered into view before rearing up on its hind legs and bellowing forth with an ear-shattering roar that ended back on all fours. A warning for being so close to his tiny kin. Pope Francis froze in place, shaken by the bestial display presented before him. Such a creature was pure carnage, and he had pissed it off by pure coincidence. Every step he took backwards was met in tow with a larger step from the hulking beast. Pope Francis let out a quiet prayer as he stepped back seemingly in vain, wondering all the time where he truly was. It surely didn't seem like home. Its pace quickened hastily as it charged forth, paw high in the air, ready to bring down and end the Pope's life again in a flash, as a whizzing of air caught his attention, before a hefty axe caught the mighty creature inside its foreleg. The creature immediately lost focus on the Pope as they both turned into the projectile's direction. A short, muscled man with a large braided orange beard and orange locks caught in a high ponytail, and a very large, muscled green man with notable tusks and a dark beard, both charging out of the surroundings and aiming their attention to the boisterous creature. In a low, guttural tone, the green man spoke fiercely.
"Filthy owlbear, leave alone!"
As he darted forth and wrenched his mighty bladed weapon from the wounded beast's side, it recoiled and shrieked in pain before setting its angry eyes back on its new targets. Weapons ate at flesh as they collided in a tidal wave of force and fury. Blood sprayed and stained the earthen floor as blow after blow rained down upon shield or haft or sank into the flesh of the alleged owlbear. It turned and snapped its beak in the face of the orange-haired man, only to be met with a rising shield that collided with a sickening crack, then an axe swing that buried itself deep into the leg joint, disabling the limb with precise efficiency. A few deft swings by the two interlopers, and the almighty beast came toppling to the floor, its lifebloods pooling around his beastly corpse. Still heavily shaken, Pope Francis was understandably taken aback when the odd couple casually strolled toward him with eyes fixed upon him, as if nothing had occurred and everything was completely normal.
"Hey, old man, you okay?"
asked the smaller of the two, an earnest look of sincerity upon his face.
"Come, let us help you,"
he added as he extended his calloused hand in a gesture of aid. Unsure of anything that was happening, and feeling as if it was all a fever dream, Pope Francis slowly took his hand, which was in turn clasped firm.
"The name's Bulldog. Pleased to meet you."
Although the man only stood about 140 centimeters, he was ripped as fuck and hairier than an 80s porno mag. Pointing back behind him to the large green man, who stood an intimidating 200 centimeters or more, he stated,
"This here's Grack. He may look tough and scary, but he's really a big softy."
"Oi!" protested Grack, a feigned look of anger etched into his brow. The Pope couldn't help but let out a chuckle, the first since waking up in this strange place.
"Where are we?"
the Pope asked after a moment, taking the opportunity to try and answer a few questions.
"Between Odag and Barmore. Odag's that way and Barmore's just a stone's throw that way."
Bulldog replied with a mirthful tone. Grack walked a bit closer with his hands on his hips, adding,
"What's your name?"
None of these names were familiar. This brought even more questions into the mix. Everyone's concentration was quickly broken, however, by the sullen hooting of a baby owlbear. It had lost its guardian in the preceding combat of ill circumstance.
"Not much you can do for it,"
stated Grack, not happy at the insinuation seemingly.
"It'll starve or be eaten by something, I reckon. Probably can't just put it down before it's more by something else."
Such a flat and brutal remark took Pope Francis by surprise, even if true to say it, so emotionless seemed barbaric in some way.
"Well, I don't know about that. Poor little thing just lost someone, then also lose its life. I will look after it."
Grack and Bulldog gave each other a look that meant they were thinking the same thing before they thought about looking at each other. Turning back, Bulldog stated flatly,
You know, these things are a lot of work, right? They need a lot of attention and they get real big.
His gaze turned to the owlbear that lay slain on the ground. An apt name, Pope Francis couldn't help but think. Determined still not to let another innocent creature die if he didn't have to, Pope Francis got down low and called forth the baby creature. It popped its head out shyly, then popped back behind the tree it was hiding behind. Resolute, he got down and lowered and called forth.
Come on, little guy. I mean you no harm.
Scrutinous eyes peeked from behind cover, seemingly watching his every move, coming out from cover only when it had determined that Pope Francis was not a threat, in fact giving off a rather pleasant vibe. With 3 bounces, it stood before the Pope, sniffing at his hands. The Pope held his breath and slowly picked up the fluffy little creature, though awaiting the worst, came to find a warm bundle of fur that gave off a faint vibrating sensation infrequently. Against all unknowns, and despite all that had happened, Pope Francis found a unique trace of joy in that moment, and a heartfelt smile formed across his face that lasted longer than what inspired it.
I guess he likes you then.
Laughed Bulldog as he meandered towards the unlikely pair.
Still haven't given me your name yet, by the way.
Oh,
Pope Francis replied. He had forgotten in his haste to get a few answers to his odd situation.
I am known to some as a Pope Francis II. Some refer to me simply as the Pope. Those close to me just call me Frank. And after what I've seen and heard today, I'm quite happy to go with any.
Laughter came about easy. Everything felt safer with the present company.
Frank it is. Pleased to meet you, Frank.
Bulldog said while grabbing the back of his head with a large, cheesy smile.
If you want to join us, we're on our way back to Baltimore. The more the merrier on the road.
Sounds like a plan to me,
said Frank with a thankful smile.
I can hopefully get answers to some of my questions there.
Amongst all of his questions, he thought one already stood out radiantly, or at least it did so to him. This weird screen had been floating around him since the owlbear had died. Could no one else see it? Or were they simply used to seeing such things all the time and paid it no consideration, as one would no sooner point out, "Oh, I think that dog just farted." Weird lettering, visibly alien to any language Frank had ever seen, flickered across the screen, and after a moment started to become completely legible. Whether that was the language changing to English finally, or something else entirely. It was written neatly, surrounded by other bits of information, including but not limited to an experience bar. "Congratulations, Gooner class acquired," was written firmly across the screen.
Gooner class acquired? What does that mean? What is a class, and more importantly, what is a Gooner?
Frank pondered to no fruition for a moment before he was pulled from thought by Grack's voice informing of their intention to depart.
And so, as we walked off down the road, a new sun on a new horizon toward a town I had never heard of, with a slew of new companions that all fell well outside my expectations for anyone I ever planned to meet ever in my life. And I can't help but think this is just the start of my story about that time I was the literal Pope and I got reincarnated as a level 1 Gooner.
叫ぶ魂赤い光に飲まれる くされる What's a real death metal ground 叫べ戦え闇に飲まれるな避けた心燃え尽きろ今すぐ宇宙の果てまで響け怒り無情な力が未来を砕く燃える闇夜セリス世界滅びも受け入れて絶望の翼彩した光よ火器を覇者として破滅の声が耳を裂く痛みの中で真実を見る鋼の刃血を求め倒れた火花夏に上がる欲望怒り心を解き放て闇を切り裂け全て終わらせろ浄化する炎にジョンヌ迎え無情の笑い声空に消え